So before I start this video, I just want to quickly say that I do apologize if you hear my fan in the background and the fact that there is some background noises behind this board because I opened the window up. It is really hot right now in my room, and it's very hot today. Not as hot as LA weather, which, if you guys don't know, this weekend LA got up to 110 degrees, and my room would be about maybe 15 degrees lower than that, but it's still very hot. Okay, so I do apologize if you hear some wind and if you hear my fan that is right below where my computer is, and also some background noises because I opened the window up. But either way, let's get started in the power rankings of match week number 19, and we start in 23rd, and this is pretty obvious because this has been a team that's been in this place for the last couple of weeks because they just cannot buy themselves a win or a draw, and that is Orlando City, who is now up to 9 games without not only not getting a draw, but they've been losing 9 games in a row. And in other words, their losing streak is now at 9. And I really think in that game against LAFC, despite the fact that on the scoreline it says it's 4-1, I didn't think Orlando City played that badly, and I don't think they deserve to get blown out 4-1 like that. And in some way, I can say that they kind of got robbed in that game because I did look at the replay of that offside goal that could have been the equalizer for Orlando City. And originally I said in the review that it looked like Dwyer was offside on that goal, and I didn't really see like the replay of that because it wasn't in the highlights. And when I look at it on the instant replay that MLS usually have every Monday, well, it looked like that should have been counted. And it wasn't Dwyer, the person that was judged offside. It was actually just the Miram that was originally looked like he was judged offside. And remember, they went to VAR for that incident, and originally the call says that he was not offside, and that in order for them to reverse the call, it needs to be clear and obvious that that is not the correct call. And in my opinion, that was not clear and obvious. Like, I understand why some people will say, well, maybe just the mirror upper body was kind of like offside and stuff like that. But when you look at it closely, it is very, very close. And if you look at even on his feet between the last defender, that is also very close. So because it was so close and because it's not clear and obvious, then that should have not been overturned. And that is the problem that a lot of people always said about VAR. You know, we said about VAR on how the ref are not doing a good job implementing it. Well, there's also that ref are not doing a good job judging whether or not that they made like a mistake, and that even though when it looked like it's not clear and obvious, they still said that it's clear and obvious and they want to overturn that. So in some way, Orlando City kind of got unlucky by that, and if that goal would have counted, then this game would never been a 4-1 game. That would have changed the whole circumstances of that game. And that game, Orlando City could have ended their long losing streak, but unfortunately it is out now at 9 games, and unless if they can finally find themselves a draw, they are going to stay in that 23rd spot. And in 22nd, this team goes back to where they were for majority of the last couple of weeks of the power rankings, but last week I moved them up 2 spots, and now they've gone back to the same spot and moved them down 2 spots, is the Quakes, who, you know, they lost to Portland, which is not a big surprise. And I really think for the Quakes, as long as if Orlando City continue losing, they will stay at that same spot. Now, if Orlando City does win or get a draw and the Quakes do lose, then the Quakes would be at 23rd. That is pretty much the only reason why the Quakes are not rock bottom right now, because the Quakes, we all know that they are probably the worst team right now in the league. I mean, they are kind of the worst team in the league if you want to look at the points per game ratio, but the only reason why they're saved from me bring them in the bottom of the power rankings is not because of my bias, but it's because Orlando City has this long fatality losing streak that I just cannot move them up no matter how bad the Quakes does. And in 21st, this team moved up one spot despite not playing, is DC United. So they get the benefit of the doubt that teams around them lost and that they didn't play this weekend, and they move up one spot. And maybe with DC United, they could potentially move themselves up in the table now that Wayne Rooney would be eligible to play for this team next week, and it is also getting very close for them to open Audi Field. I think it's their next game where they will have finally their first home game of the season. And in 20th, this team dropped 3 spots from last week, and that, of course, is Colorado. So, unfortunately for the Rapids, they lost both of their games this week. They lost their midweek game to the Sounders, and then they lose to the Impact on the road. And those are the 2 teams that the Rapids clearly need to get at least a point out of them if they don't want to compete for the wooden spoon that the Quakes are having right now. But unfortunately, they lost both of them, and they're now dropping into the 20th spot. And in 19th place, speaking of the Sounders, that's where they are in 19. So they didn't move anywhere because they did win in that 4th of July matchup between the Rapids. And at that point, I did move them up one spot. But because they drew against the Revs, and the way that they drew against the Revs, that is where I bumped them back down to the same spot. Because, let's face it, that was an absolute boring match and an uninspiring performance by the Sounders. So, Sounders stays at the same spot, and in 18th place, this team also stays at the same spot, and that, of course, is Minnesota. So, despite the fact that the Loons did lose 3-0 to the Dynamo this weekend, they did beat Toronto 4-3 at home, and that certainly was a very impressive victory, thanks to Darwin Quintero potentially scoring the best hat-trick we have ever seen in MLS. And yeah, because of that, that just basically evens things out, and they stay in that 18th position. And in 17th place, this team moved up 4 spots, is the Whitecaps. So the Whitecaps got a benefit of the doubt that, one, they were able to beat the Fire, who were red hot lately, and 2, teams around them also lost. And for Vancouver, I think what happened was, since the previous week, I moved them down so low that if they can just get a win and that other team around them lose, they, of course, will move up a spot. And I really think for the Whitecaps, if they can continue this form, this is probably going to be where they are mostly on. I mean, I think what I have done with the Whitecaps this season is that there's been time where I moved them up very high when they have that kind of unbeaten streak, and then I moved them very low when they had like those 2 games where they kind of lost. But the reason why I do that is because, 1, when they lose games, they lose very badly, and 2, even in those unbeaten streak, there are games that they should have won, and that they should have at least, if they would have closed out game, they would have probably moved up more. And not to mention that some of their unbeaten run that they have, they did not get wins during that time. They got draws. So that's another big difference why Vancouver has been kind of like all over my power rankings this season. And in 16th place, this team stays at the same spot, and that, of course, is Philly. So I was tempting to put Philly in 17th and put Vancouver up to 16th, but then I feel like that I would move Vancouver a little bit too high. And, the Union, they did play against the best team in the league, and, they had a couple of decent chances in this game, but unfortunately, they falter. And I just think that right now, for these teams that is right around this spot, these are the teams that are either currently fighting for playoff position or are currently above the red line, but they are in danger of falling out of it if they start losing some game and the team below them start to win. So this kind of area is like the team that are just fighting it out and potentially can can get into the playoffs this season. And in 15th place, this team lost 2 spots, and that, of course, is TFC. So, despite the fact that TFC did get that draw against Sporting KC, which in some way you could say that was a much-needed draw, they did lose to Minnesota on the road. And that is one team you do not lose to whenever, no matter if you're on the road or at home. And heck, even my Quakes team has been able to beat Minnesota, and it's kind of sad that the only 2 wins that we have got so far this season is against Minnesota, and even so the worst team in the league was able to beat Minnesota. Even Colorado was able to snap their losing streak against Minnesota. So there's no excuse for TFC to lose that game, and that if they really want to push themselves to get back into that, above that red line, and have this comeback season, those are the games that you cannot lose whatsoever. And in 14th place, this team moved up 1 spot, and that of course is Houston. So I was tempting to move Houston up a little bit higher, but they beat Minnesota, which everybody tends to always beat Minnesota whenever Minnesota is on the road. And the fact that Houston did get almost lost that game to LAFC, and they had to rely on this remarkable comeback. So that is why I decided to put them in 14th. And they, like I said, they belong in a group. The teams around 12 to maybe 17th are the teams that are kind of like either looking on the outside of the playoffs or currently above the red line, but they are in danger of falling into it. And in 13th place, this is another team that is looking outside of the playoff but trying to get in, and that of course is the Fire, who lost 1 spot this weekend. And have they not lost this weekend against Vancouver, I would have probably either put them at the same spot or move them up 1 spot. But because of the fact that they lost this weekend and once again they fall out of the red line, they moved down 1 spot and now into 13th place. And also their 5-game unbeaten streak has come to a screeching end, which is quite unfortunate because Chicago, for first time this season, finally found some consistency. And let's just hope that this is just a beginning of Chicago, or this is not the beginning of just them going back to their old form, which is just win, draw, lose, win, draw, lose, just being kind of very inconsistent. And in 12th place, this team dropped 7 spots from last week, and this is the biggest loser, and that of course is Columbus. So the reason why I put Columbus this low is because I thought for sure that they were going to probably start another good run after a win last week, but instead that was not the case. In fact, Columbus lost to the Galaxy 4-0 in that game, and I don't know how in the world they did not able to solve that Galaxy defense that has been just leaky at best in terms of how they've been defending. And even though this game is on the road for them against the Galaxy, and usually I don't put road team as the biggest loser unless they are facing a bad team and they're actually like a good team and they lost to them, and or if is actually a loss on the road where they lost like 6 or 7-0 like that. Whenever you face the Galaxy on the road, it's pretty much a home game. I mean, the Galaxy, they just do not do well at home whatsoever, and the fact that Columbus get blowout like that, yeah, that is not a very good sign. And in 11th place, this team stays at the same spot, and that, of course, is Montreal. So, Montreal, of course, have won 4 out of 5 games, but the reason why I decided not to move them up is that I think this is probably the highest I will put them as of now, because one, they haven't beat a lot of teams that is even very relevant this season. I mean, the 3 of the 4 teams that they have beat during this good run is against teams like Orlando City and the Rapids, who are near the bottom of the table. But at the same time, if they can beat NYCFC, and I wouldn't say beat is a good way to put at it, because I just don't see how that could potentially happen. Then I think they could move up into the top 10. But as of now, I think I put Montreal right in the 11th spot, and if they can continue this good run, then no doubt they are moving up into the top 10. And in 10th place, this team moved down one spot from last week, and that, of course, is the Revs, who missed a big opportunity at home to potentially get a win and distance themselves in terms of 6th place, and that dangerous kind of spot of falling out, and that dogfight between 5 other teams in the Eastern Conference for that last spot. But unfortunately, they drew against the Sounders in, I already said, the most uninspiring 0-0 draw that you will ever see. So the Revs dropped one spot from last week, and in 9th place, this team dropped 2 spots from last week, and that, of course, is Sporting KC, who continues to have another rough week. You know, they lost to RSL 4-2 in a game that they had 2 men sent off, and against TFC, when they definitely were kind of the better team and had the majority of the opportunity to potentially win the game against TFC, they drew in that game. So it's been a rough week for Sporting KC. It's been a rough couple of weeks for Sporting KC too. I mean, they've been going 3 games without a win, which is the longest so far for this season, and hopefully they might recover that in their next game and try to get themselves back into the top spot, because they have now fallen down to 3rd place in the Western Conference after holding that 1st place for a long time, for pretty much every single week this season. But in 8th place, this team moved up 2 spots, and that, of course, is the Galaxy. And I feel like I put the Galaxy a little bit too high for these last couple of weeks in terms of the power rankings, because let's face it, the Galaxy themselves are not really that consistent, and the fact that I still put them that high, I feel maybe that's a little bit wrong. But hey, you know, they won 4-0 against Columbus. They are start to show sign of them potentially get themselves back into the playoffs, and they also are on this unbeaten run that is now, I think, at 4 games or 5 games. I think it's 4 that they are on. So, you know, the Galaxy are started to climb back up the table and get themselves back above the red line. In fact, I think they're now above the red line now. I know that the last time I seen the standings, the Galaxy were in 8th place, but with their recent kind of unbeaten run, I'm pretty sure they're back above the red line right now. But in 7th place, and this team lost 1 spot, and that, of course, is FC Dallas. So this is a tough one for me to put them right there, because they did get that come from behind win against Atlanta, but then they lose to RSL on the road, and this was right when they took the lead of the Western Conference for the first time, outright in terms of the lead. I mean, they did take the lead before, but that was because Sporting KC didn't play a game, and when Sporting KC won their next game, they went back on top. But now they have took the lead all right, and you know, I feel like it's a bit harsh to put them in 7th place, but at the same time, you know, Oscar Pereira, if he could have just put his starters in this game, then I don't think FC Dallas would have been in 7th place, right, and moved down 1 spot. I think they probably could have been in 6th place and get a draw out of that game. And speaking of RSL, they move up 9 spots from last week, and it's been an impressive week for RSL. I mean, if there is any team so far this week that are probably the most happiest coming out of this week, besides maybe NYCFC after they beat their rival, it has to be RSL. I mean, in a week where they beat the best team in the West, that is Sporting KC. Well, at that time, Sporting KC was still the best team in the league, and then they did it again in the weekends, beating FC Dallas, the best team in the Western Conference, and you know, they're now moving all the way up to 6th place, and I think they're still in 4th place in the Western Conference, but they are lurking on that top 3 spot. And as I said many times before, if RSL can replicate that home form that they had onto the road form, then this team definitely is going to make the top 3. But in 5th place, this team lost 3 spots from last week, and that, of course, is the Red Bulls, who lost the New York Derby, and in a game that it's going to be a painful loss to them, not only because they lost to their biggest rival, but it's also how they lose it. Like, the Red Bulls, this team, certainly looked like they were potentially going to get a goal right near the end, and then they just concede a very sloppy goal to NYCFC, almost gifting them that goal in the 85th minute. And yeah, I mean, that was certainly a loss that the Red Bulls will try to forget in a hurry, but unfortunately it won't, because they were playing against their biggest rival, and that must hurt. And speaking of their biggest rival, NYCFC moved up 5 spots, and NYCFC is got to be happy about it, because they just beat their biggest rival, and this is one of the rare times that NYCFC was able to beat the Red Bulls, because if you look at the history of the New York Derby, which is not very long, most of the time the Red Bulls were able to come out as victorious. And for once that NYCFC was able to get a win against the Red Bulls, that must feel very good for them. And because of that, they moved up 5 spots from last week. And in 3rd place, this team moved up 1 spot from last week. And that, of course, is Portland, who is continued their longest winning run at 11 games, I believe. Well, not winning run, but unbeaten run, that is. They are now unbeaten in 11 games, and it was pretty easy against the Quakes, and as much as it hurts me to say that, it was the case. Like, that game was basically a training session for the Timbers. Like, they could have not even played like up to 75%, and they would have still beat the Quakes. That is how comfortable that game was for the Timbers. And in 2nd place, this team moved up 1 spot, and that, of course, is LAFC, who once again won again. They beat Orlando City, and LAFC is the real deal right now. And I just think when they get their big piece back, and the fact that they're also going to get Andre Horta, their 3rd DP signing, this team is going to be a monster of a team to deal with come the second half of the season, and they would definitely challenge Atlanta United for that top spot. And speaking of Atlanta United, they of course hold on to this top spot, but LAFC is closing. I really think if LAFC can continue to win like this, and if Atlanta does maybe kind of like draw or does not look impressive in a win, then I really think LAFC is going to get that top spot. This LAFC team is just red hot right now. I mean, the way that they've been dominating team looks very similar to what we have seen so far earlier in the season, and they're doing this without their best players. I mean, that is just absolutely incredible, and it's a matter of time before LAFC will get that top spot, and Atlanta will have to drop down to 2nd place. But yeah, let me know in the comments below, what do you think of all 23 teams I put in the power rankings? Did I put your team a little bit too high, or did I put your team a little bit too low? Let me know in the comments below. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.